Hi there guys, I'm Renee. I am the owner and artist behind Chicly Reclaimed Decor, and I am also a member of Paint Couture's creative team. And welcome back to another fun tutorial. This month, I'm going to be sharing with you how to create this salt wash textured look along with the hand-painted patina, all using Paint Couture's Crust, their Luxe Metallics, Perfectly Pigment powders, and so much more. So if that's something you'd be interested in learning, stick around guys, because that's what I'll be going over today. Before we begin, please do like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of these awesome tutorials from the Paint Couture creative team. Okay, so to start things off, I'm gonna be removing all of this hardware, and I'm simply just gonna let it soak in some simple green to give it a thorough clean. Next up, I'm gonna give this piece a good scuff sand. Scuff sanding is a technique that is used to prepare a surface for paint or stain. It involves lightly sanding the surface using a fine grit sandpaper or sanding block. As you can see here, I'm using a fine grit 240 sandpaper to scuff this piece. The purpose of scuff sanding is to create a smooth yet slightly roughened surface that allows the paint or stain to adhere better. Once that step was done, I came back through and gave this piece a thorough cleaning. When I am going about redesigning a jewelry box like this, to remember exactly where each individual drawer goes, I will come through and I will mark on the bottom the number and the side for where they coincide. I find this step to be really helpful because I'm going to be hand painting and adding texture in a certain design, and this makes it so when I go to put my drawers back in, the design all matches up the way that I want it, and I don't have to go about trying to remember how I painted the pattern to begin with. Okay, so now that this piece is all prepped, we are ready to start creating. So the whole star of this transformation is going to be Paint Couture's Crust. This is part of their texture line, and it's an acrylic plaster that has natural minerals in it, so it has more of that gritty salt wash texture that I am going for. As you can see here, I'm using an artist's brush to stipple this product onto the jewelry box. I'm using just my artistic discretion with this, but making sure, like here, that you're not going to add crust, which is going to impede or obstruct any of the drawers opening. I laid down a pretty thick layer of texture on the legs because I wanted there to be a lot of that salt-washed texture there. A good rule of thumb when working with this product is the thicker you lay it down, the more texture you will have, and the thinner, the less. Over top of this texture, I'm going to be doing a patina design. When I'm doing that, I try to think how patina naturally occurs in nature. It's kind of like algae, how it grows or splays over things. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to add a thick layer of this crust texture in the middle and going down the side on this jewelry box, and then a thinner layer around that. To apply the thinner texture, I just usually use whatever texture is left over on my artist's brush. If perchance throughout this video I inspire you to try any of these amazing Paint Couture products, I will put a full product list and an affiliate link down in the description below. Here's a close-up look at that texture once I was all done. You can see that there are varying layers of thickness as well as peaks, which is exactly what I am going for. Once again, I find it extremely helpful to have some kind of visual reference for my design. For this piece, I actually was inspired by a patina digital paper that I found on Etsy. As you can see, I've laid down a quote-unquote vein of thicker texture diagonally, and then I'm going about adding just a smaller amount of texture around that. And again, be sure to wipe off any excess crust texture that may build up around the edges of these drawers. In this video, I will be sharing with you how I lay down several different layers of texture to obtain the specific look that I'm going for. Now, if per se, all you wanted was to get a salt washed look, all you would need to do is lay down this one single layer of texture, paint your piece, and then sand back. That is how you can simply create an easy salt washed look. But I have specifically found over the years, by laying down some texture, sanding it down, and not sanding other layers, I add more depth and realism to my design. So just like my friend Kristana says, trust this process. Okay, so when my crust has had time to dry, I will come back through with a 240 grit sandpaper. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sand down this crust on the sides here until it's almost flush. But on the edges here, you will see in a minute, I did not touch the crust texture. This is an artistic decision and one you will see a purpose for later on in the video. Okay, so here's a side-by-side comparison of the drawers before they were sanded and then after. And here's the jewelry box after the first layer of crust texture has been sanded back. Now we're ready to start adding our second layer of texture. Starting with the crust, I'm going to be stippling it where I want there to be more of that sandy, gritty type look. Here's an up-close look at what I'm talking about. Once again, once that has had time to dry, we are going to be coming back in with Couture's Embossing Medium to create a third layer. Now this is a smooth acrylic plaster that's usually used for raised stencil designs. But I have found that by stippling this product like so, you can create another type of texture that I absolutely love. And here's an up-close look so you can see the difference. Later on, we're going to be doing some dry brushing, and it is going to bring out and bring together all of these three layers of texture. And then I just continued with that process of layering the crust and the embossing medium on the rest of the jewelry box. Okay, so now that we have all of our texture down, we are ready to start talking paint. So this is Aquamarine. This is part of Couture's new chalk style paint. I love this paint because it's not as thick as other chalk or clay-based paints that I've used, so I don't have to use as much water with it, which is kind of nice. And the coverage is absolutely fantastic, as you can see here. And I am applying this with Couture's 2-inch synthetic brush. All right, guys, and this is what it looked like just after one coat of that chalk style paint. I absolutely love looking at the patterns that we've created using the crust and the embossing medium. All right, and now we are back to the sanding and distressing part of this project. Distressing is a technique where you add simulated marks of wear onto an item. Here I am using an 80 grit sandpaper to sand back along these edges to make it look as if the paint has worn away over the years. As you can see, I'm partially sanding back the embossing medium and crust texture that we just added as well. During this point, I use my own artistic discretion as to how much I leave on and how much I take off. During this step, I prefer to use just a handheld block sander to sand back the texture and the paint. This way, I have artistic control as to how much texture I leave on and off. Same goes for paint. And this is a close-up look at the crust texture versus the embossing medium. When I'm distressing something, I like to think of where items naturally would chip or the paint would wear away. And you can usually find a lot of wear on the corners and edges, especially on drawers like this, because they're sliding in and out. And then I just continued on with that process for the rest of the piece. This little jewelry box is going to have a Mediterranean theme, and so to help me with that, I'm going to be adding some molds. And what great timing, because Couture just came out with a new Rapid Casting Resin. They have it in 2 colors, guys. They have it in white, and they also have it in black. Anytime you are working with resin, I highly recommend that you make sure that your surface is level. I also recommend that you wear gloves and work in a well-ventilated area. This is a 2-part casting resin with a 1-to-1 mix ratio. So you need to start off by measuring 1 part of step 1 and then measure 1 part of step 2. Then you want to mix together thoroughly for about 30 seconds. Remember that this is a fast casting resin, which means it sets up quickly, so you will need to pour your resin within at least 3 minutes. After about 10 minutes, your resin should turn white and it is ready to be demolded. I'm going to be taking this mold and covering up these 2 faux drawers on top. But to do that, I need to cut off these 2 little ends so that way it fits perfectly in place. Next up, I'm going to be using Couture's Premium Plus 2-in-1 primer in the color gray to prime this resin piece to be painted with the aquamarine chalk style paint that we used earlier. I was really impressed with the work time on this resin. It's set up within the 10 minutes, but it remained flexible like this for up to 15 to 20 minutes, which allowed me plenty of time to paint it and also to get it glued down and contoured to this curved drawer surface. I like to use Titebond Quick and Thick, and I just add an even layer onto the back of this mold. Once I have my mold placed where I would like, I'm just going to take a wet paintbrush and wipe back any excess glue. And then I'm going to apply some tape to hold it in place. Okay, so next up, we're going to be using some iFlex wood products as well to redesign this piece. These molds are wood composites that when heated become flexible, making them super easy to work with and adhere to a variety of surfaces. These molds already come pre-made, which is convenient because you don't have to have your own silicone mold or any clay or resin. You just heat them up and go. And as you can see right here, they're super easy to customize. All you have to do is heat them up to where they're flexible and cut them. These pieces are also sandable, so you can cut, sand, and customize molds to your liking. Now that our molds are all painted, we can go about the process of gluing these down. Same thing as before, I like to use Titebond Quick and Thick, but this time I'm going to lay my mold down and I'm going to heat it up and then I'm going to press it down into place. This makes it so the mold completely warms up and can bend and contour that to that surface. And then I'm just going to take a wet paintbrush and wipe back this excess glue. Okay, so we are going to start with our first layer of dry brushing, and we are going to be using Candlelight. This is part of their acrylic mineral line of paint, and we are going to use this to accent not only the texture, but these beautiful detailed molds as well. Dry brushing is probably the magic that makes this piece. It is one of my favorite techniques to use. It's where you have very little paint left over on your brush, as you can see here. And then with a gentle hand, you brush over top of your molds or texture so that it just lightly catches on the edges to highlight and bring out all the details. Next up, we're going to continue on with the dry brushing process, but we are going to be using Coastal Breeze. It's this beautiful light blue metallic color, and this is part of Paint Couture's Luxe Metallic line of paint. Always remember to stir your paint thoroughly before you begin. Then, using that same dry brushing technique, I'm going to dry brush this Coastal Breeze color over the entire texture on this jewelry box, just like I did with the Candlelight color. You can really start to see all that texture starting to pop as we continue on doing this dry brushing. Okay, so we're going to start working on the patina side of things. And we're going to start with Paint Couture's Gemstone. Again, this is part of their Luxe Metallic line. But instead of brushing it all over the texture, we are going to mainly focus on the thicker, quote unquote, veining-like texture that we added earlier. Remember, during this process, it definitely helps to have your visual picture reference. Probably my favorite thing about these metallics is how they catch the light differently. And then again, same as before, I'm going to be using this gemstone to dry brush over that thicker, quote unquote, vein of texture that we added earlier on. And this is what it looked like after we had dry brushed with the Candlelight, the Gemstone, and the Coastal Breeze. Next up, we are going to be using Paint Couture's Perfectly Pigment powders. This one in particular is their beautiful metallic color bronze. And we are going to mix this up so we create our own metallic paint. To do this, you need to use a gloss top coat, so that way you keep the metallic sheen. One thing that I absolutely love about doing this is that I have, once again, artistic control as to how heavily pigmented my metallic paint is. And you can also see that if I mix this up in a container with a lid, it stores just like any other paint. And like I said, when you are mixing up these pigments, the only thing that you really need to be sure of is that you use a gloss top coat. Otherwise, you can make these as pigmented as your heart desires. So I definitely wanted to add a little patina to these molds. So I'm just stipling it very gently over top of it and then dry brushing the texture around it. In particular, I am focusing on dry brushing over where we have dry brushed the Gemstone Luxe Metallic, which was the darker green color. As you can see here, I switched to a little bit of a bigger brush because it makes it that much easier when I'm working on these larger areas. And just like earlier, we are dry brushing again this bronze directly over that gemstone metallic that we added earlier. Once I was done with that step, I simply took my paintbrush and ran the back of it along the edges of these drawers. This just adds one more really neat patina element to the design. I also will take the back of my loaded paintbrush and tap it over that raised texture. Because of how heavily pigmented this is, it just creates this really bold, beautiful design. And then here's a peek at the patina that we had down so far. You can definitely see a difference between the top and the bottom drawers. And then I just continued on with that process, hand painting this patina design over the rest of this jewelry box. Okay, so to add some age and even more dimension to this design, we are going to be using a glaze. But before we do that, we need to seal our paint first. Well, why is that? Well, it's because we used Paint Couture's new chalk style paint. Chalk style paint is porous, so if you were to put a wax or a glaze over top, it would absorb that product, which in turn would alter the color of the paint that I already have down. And in sealing before we glaze, I also once again have more artistic control over how much or how little glaze I leave on my piece. I am using Paint Couture's Extreme Gloss Top Coat because remember, I don't want to dampen any of that beautiful metallic paint that we so meticulously laid down. Once your top coat is dry, you're ready to start glazing. I definitely recommend you wear gloves when you're doing this process just because this stuff is so heavily pigmented. And you're gonna want either a paper towel or rag to wipe off any excess glaze. What I'm doing here is I'm just stippling this product into the molds. And then I am going to come back through and wipe back any excess glaze that's over top. If you can remember from earlier, I laid down some pretty thick, heavy texture on these drawers. Well, as you can see, as I'm wiping back the glaze, it really got in and brought out that texture. Here's a side-by-side comparison for you. And this is just a really good up-close look of what it looks like, not only the texture but the mold when we wiped back that Verde glaze. I also glazed the texture on the drawers as well. One thing I absolutely love is being able to use this vintage hardware. And to do that, I am going to be painting it. I am going to be first priming it with Paint Couture's Premium Plus 2-in-1 bonding and blocking primer in the color gray. Once again, this is just going to make it so the paint can adhere properly to this metal. And then I'm just going to paint them exactly like I did the jewelry box. Okay guys, and this is a peek at the finished salt wash texture, hand-painted patina, Mediterranean-inspired jewelry box redesign. We used Paint Couture's Crust as well as their Embossing Medium to lay down this beautiful salt wash texture, as well as their Luxe Metallics and Perfectly Pigments to hand paint this beautiful patina design. We used iFlex wood products as well as Paint Couture's new Rapid Casting Resin to create these molds and add a unique Mediterranean-inspired look to this jewelry box redesign. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I'm Renee. I am the owner and artist behind Chicly Reclaimed Decor, and you can follow me for more furniture flips as well as painting tips. And definitely be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more painting tutorials from Paint Couture Paint.